Boys, so we're gonna be going over how to get rid of perfectionism forever. As you guys know, like, perfectionism is a motherfucker, right? Like, it'll really steer you away from doing the things that you truly want to do in your life, and is usually the biggest reason why people struggle with executing at a high level, right? So contrary to popular belief, it doesn't actually exist. And for the record, this is coming from someone who spent 7 years dealing with perfectionism. Like, let me give you a few examples. So for me, I was a high school athlete. I played soccer for a very long time, and I was pretty damn good, right? I got invited to go to a lot of Division One soccer camps and go kind of play in showcases to potentially play in college. And that is something that in high school I really wanted to do. Now, I always had this imposter syndrome, this perfectionism, where I was so afraid of making mistakes and not being perfect that I literally wouldn't go to these camps because I was so afraid of not, doing the thing at the highest level. I was so afraid of what people would think about me and all of these things. And perfectionism was honestly the reason why I didn't play soccer in college, why I didn't continue going on to the next level. I'll give you another example. I always wanted to start posting videos on social media. I always wanted to start a business. And I genuinely was so fearful of not being perfect when I would post like Instagram Reels or YouTube videos that I wouldn't take action. Now, when I was in Georgia about a year ago, spending 500 hours getting privately mentored about neurolinguistic programming and the subconscious mind and how the brain actually works, I realized that perfectionism doesn't actually exist. Now, we'll get into that in just a second, but as soon as I was able to figure out what the actual root of my perfectionism was and use a bunch of tools to get rid of that, I no longer dealt with it. I started doing things that made me uncomfortable. I was able to take action, go out of my comfort zone all the time. And now I'm in a state where I love trying new things. I can actually do the things that I've always dreamt of doing because I'm not afraid of failure. I'm not afraid of falling on my face. I don't need to be perfect, right? I know that perfection is impossible. And what I'm about to show you is the exact framework that I used to get there. So you're likely right here if you're struggling with perfectionism, right? And no one wants to be the guy who is struggling in this loop. It's not fun and it's draining. Your energy's low. You can't take action. You're stuck in this spiral of perfectionism, shame. And this is what it actually tends to look like, right? Now, usually this is fear mislabeled as perfectionism, and we'll talk about what's actually beneath the fear in just a second. But this can be fear of judgment, fear of failure, all of these different irrational fears that we have that cause us to feel like we have to be perfect. Now, what does that usually cause? Procrastination, overthinking, analysis paralysis. Now, usually when you're in those states, you don't take action, and no output equals no proof, right? So without any action, you don't have any evidence as to whether it works or whether it doesn't work, whether you were right or whether you were wrong. And so naturally, you start feeling shame. You start beating yourself up. And the fear continues because you didn't actually answer the questions that you had. You didn't conquer the overthinking or the analysis paralysis because you had no output. So naturally, you have no data to base these thoughts off of. So you don't know whether they're rational thoughts or irrational because there's zero proof. And so people tend to get stuck in this cycle. And the biggest lie that I personally believed was that I had fucking time, right? You see this rabbit right here? You don't have time. Time is running out. And if you have big goals, if you have big dreams, like, this is going to take those away from you if you do not change right fucking now. So the very first thing we need to do is identify like what is actually causing us to feel like we need to be perfect, right? And so if we come up here, perfectionism is just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's so much deeper shit going on that we're completely unaware of. And this is what I learned when I studied myself and I studied the subconscious mind for hours and hours and hours. So usually right below perfectionism, we have this deep attachment to outcomes. And what I mean by this is we let results, like physical results, dictate the way we feel about ourselves. So let's say I was trying to start a business, right? And I was posting on social media to advertise for my business. Now, if I was attached to the results, the amount of views or the amount of money that I made would dictate how I felt about myself. And this is not where you want to be. Now, where does this attachment stem from, right? It's usually from a fear of failure or a fear of judgment, right? Because if we weren't afraid of failing or we weren't afraid of being judged by others, the physical results wouldn't matter, right? Because that's usually what people base their judgment off of, is the physical. That's what people see. That's what they're making assumptions off of. And if we're not afraid of these things, naturally we won't care about being attached to the actual results. Now, why do we have these fears of what other people think? Or why do we have these fears of failure and this pressure that we're putting on ourselves? Well, it usually stems from a lack of internal confidence, right? We're not confident in ourselves and what we're capable of. Well, where does that come from? An unclear identity, right? If you're unclear on who you are as a person, what your purpose is, what you're meant to be doing, naturally, you're not going to have much confidence. And most of the time, our identity issues stem from subconscious limiting beliefs from when we were younger. What do I mean by this? Because this is the root of everything. This is what I learned when I was in Georgia, right? So the subconscious mind intakes millions and millions of information per second via our five senses, right? But consciously, what we're aware of, we only intake about 100 to 150 of those bits of information. And so since we were born, our brain has been conditioned and programmed through every event that we have experienced and everything we have consumed, and it dictates the way that we think, our beliefs, our emotions, what motivates us, and essentially our identity, right? And so the sooner that you can become aware of how your brain has been programmed and what is actually authentically yours versus what you think you need to be because of how you were programmed, the sooner you'll realize what your identity is, what your purpose is, and who you actually are, right? And so where this started for me was my mother. She was very, very tough on me growing up. She would get very angry if I didn't bring a pencil to my second grade class, for example. Just little things, because she grew up in a tough household. She essentially got her way through college and law school on a full scholarship. She was a valedictorian. Like, she made a business for herself. She was a phenomenal, super smart woman, right? And she made the most of her circumstances. Well, naturally, that kind of trickled into the way she raised me, and I developed this perfectionistic identity, right? I felt like I had to be perfect in everything that I did. Well, naturally, that's impossible, right? And so what ended up happening was that I would start losing confidence because I wouldn't be perfect in something, and then I would get in my head because I thought that that meant I was a failure, or that meant that I wasn't worthy, all of these things. And then I had these fears of judgment, these fears of failure, these fears of not being perfect all the time, because that was just how my brain was wired. And so naturally, I attached myself to the outcomes because I thought that as long as I'm doing the thing on paper, as long as I'm getting great results, I'm making money, I'm playing well for my sports team, I'm getting good grades, all of these things, that meant that essentially I was a good person, or I was worthy, or I was perfect, all of these things, right? I was outsourcing my identity through physical things, and that's why I was attached to the outcomes. And of course, that came off as being a perfectionist. And so I labeled myself as that for a very, very long time, when all that was really going on was that I was behaving and thinking based on how my brain was programmed, right? Based on the subconscious beliefs that were installed in me at a young age. That's all that it was. And so realistically, this is where you could be, right? You could just be at peace, not worried about your perfectionism, doing the things, getting the results that you want, chasing your dreams, and not worrying about failure or being perfect once you kind of understand the next few steps that we're about to go over, right? So the very first thing you need to just ingrain in your head is you just need to stop waiting to feel ready and collect the evidence, right? Because as we talked about in the very first spiral, if you don't have any data to back up your thinking, naturally, you're not going to be able to change your mindset. So the first step is just taking action. You have to understand that failure is actually a great indication because it means you're in a state of growth. And when you can use failure as data to get better, instead of attaching it to who you are as a person, it will no longer affect you in a negative sense. So the reason why a lot of people, and the reason why I was so stuck, was I was trying to eliminate the fear first, right? If I was trying something new and I was afraid of like what would happen, I would think that the fear was going to go away before I actually started the activity. Well, this is just not fucking true, fellas, right? Like fear gets eliminated through action. I was also waiting for confidence to just spawn out. Like, how the fuck would I get confidence about doing something I've never done if I didn't actually take action, right? Just think about that objectively for a second. And then I was overcomplicating everything, right? So I would think that it required all these steps, or I would think of all these bad situations in my head that could go wrong. But realistically, what's the worst that's going to happen? If you really think about like what the actual worst possible outcome would be when you're kind of nervous about something, you kind of realize like, hey, 2 weeks from now, I'll probably get over this. Even 2 days from now. Like, it's not the end of the world if you really, really, really think about all the worst possible outcomes. Thinking instead of acting, right? So think about it like this. There's a difference between a thought and thinking. Now, a thought is like authentic to you. There's usually positive emotions surrounding it. It's the thought of like, the new idea you have to try something new. Usually you feel pretty good about it, right? But naturally what the brain does is it starts thinking about the thought, because our brain's job is to protect us. It's to help us survive. When we were living in the wild and hunting animals with sticks, our brain was a survival tool. And the problem is, it still is to this day. And so naturally you have a thought, right? Like let's say I wanted to start a new hobby, right? I wanted to get really good at swimming because, for example, right now I'm training for a triathlon. So I think about swimming, I think about doing this Ironman, and I'm just like, yes, awesome, joy, good emotions. And then all of a sudden, I start thinking, my brain's survival mechanism kicks on, and it's like, well, what if this goes wrong? What if you can't figure it out? Like, it's trying to protect me from something new, because the brain hates new things, right? It's not comfortable with new things. And naturally, I start thinking, and all of a sudden, I'm in a state of anxiety, and all of a sudden, I'm overthinking, and I feel procrastination and not wanting to swim and fear and all of these things, right? So if you can develop this lens of like identifying when you have a thought versus thinking, you'll naturally stop letting your thoughts get to you. So whenever you have a thought, think about positive emotions. You're going to base this off of your feelings, right? So if you feel good, it's a thought. If you feel negative emotions, you are thinking, right? And what you have to remind yourself is, hey, this is just my brain trying to protect me. Brain, you can go fuck off. You can go get some coffee right now. I don't need you to protect me from learning a new skill. I'm okay. I'm not hunting a woolly mammoth with a fucking stick. We're all right. And as soon as you can kind of train your mind to think through that lens, you'll naturally realize that not only are you not your thoughts, but it's just your brain's survival mechanisms and not actually how you feel or what you think. It's not authentic to you. It's just your brain. There's a difference between your thoughts and who you actually are, and you have to remember that. So what you must do before we get into the actual breakdown of what this will look like is understand what the root actually is. So you have to take your perfectionism and you have to go down the iceberg and figure out what caused you to be that way in the first place, right? And then you just have to start doing 1 rep per day. So identify what you want, where you're kind of hitting your mental block, and just take some sort of action. It doesn't have to be, a crazy step in the right direction, but it has to be something, because what that's doing is training your brain to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And then after you take the action, you can't evaluate yourself. Like, think about it. When have you ever actually done something new when you've just been immediately just phenomenal at it, right? Like even when we were learning how to walk, right? You fall on your face as a baby, you take one little step at a time, and now we're walking. When you're riding a bike, when you're learning a new sport, all of these things. It's not like you're just going to be perfect, and society and social media and all of these things make us feel like we have to be right away, but no one actually shows where they started at ground zero, right? You also have to establish a set of non-negotiables regardless of how you feel. So this is what I go over with my clients, right? We have systems in place that are aligned with where they actually want to be, who they actually want to become, and it aligns back down to daily non-negotiables that you have to do every single day that will get you closer to your goals, right? And then finally, identifying with the process over the results. Another thing I go over with my clients, like if you can understand that as long as you keep doing something, you'll naturally get to where you want to be, you'll realize that the only form of failure is quitting, right? The numbers don't matter. The money in your bank account doesn't matter. The skills don't actually matter. It's staying consistent in the process and just being 1% better every single day. So this is what this actually looks like, right? You identify your goal and you make a plan in your head. And naturally, what happens, especially if you're starting something new, the overthinking begins, right? We start thinking about all the worst things that could happen. We start developing these fears, all of these things. And so this is where you have a decision, right? You can take action or not. And what happens when you don't take action is you go down this shame spiral because you're like, why can't I do the things I tell myself I'm going to do? Why do I get so anxious to try new things? Is there something wrong with me? Like, you just go down this spiral. Now, what comes from that? Negative beliefs are strengthened, right? When you start overthinking and being in these states of shame, naturally your identity kind of molds to your beliefs. What you believe about is what happens in your life. Your beliefs determine your results. And so if you're in your head and you're like, oh, I'm a failure, I'm a bad person, I'm lazy, I can't get stuff done, naturally that's going to be your reality. And then the pit of doom and despair, right? You start becoming that person and you feel horrible, right? You can't get anything done. It gets even harder to make decisions. You get even more self-doubt. You pick up vices to make yourself feel better. And the loop continues, right? Because then after you've been in the pit for a long time, what usually happens? You're like, oh, I got to get my shit together. I got to make a change. So you make a new plan and then the whole cycle repeats itself. Now, on the contrary, if you were to just to force yourself to take action, right? And just do the uncomfortable and just face your fears and just do it, right? Regardless of the results. And once you realize that failure is actually the greatest teacher, after you go down the iceberg that we just covered, you'll realize regardless of whether the result, like the physical result, is positive or negative, you have valuable data on what you can do better to improve on, right? You start learning, you start getting better at the skill. When I was training for an Ironman, the first fucking time I jumped in the pool, mind you, I'm like 4 weeks in right now. The first time I jumped in the pool, I was so horrible. And all the other swimmers were really good. They were looking at me like I was just fucking, I was worried about all these things, but I was just like, all right, I'm going to figure this out. It's been 4 weeks and I already feel so much more confident, right? Like, action drives results. Now, naturally, the confidence and knowledge increases, right? Like I just talked about, you start feeling better. You start developing more tools on how to prevent the mistake from happening again, right? You get better at the skill. And then you simply just have to continue adjusting and looking at the data until your result is achieved. Because as long as you are actually looking at your mistakes as data and trying to improve from the last time, eventually, if you're 1% better every single day, eventually you'll get to where you want to be. It's inevitable. It's the law of compounding actions. And so the biggest thing here, fellas, is just understanding yourself. Right? In order to remove all of the negative things going on, you first have to become aware of where they actually came from. Now, if you're not sure how to actually do this and you want to learn a little bit more, you can DM me on Instagram or book a call down below. I'm more than happy to talk about that. This is what I do with all of my one-on-one clients. But until you can become aware of how your brain actually operates and what's actually causing your surface level issues, you're never ever going to break this cycle. Now, I hope this was helpful. Let me know down below what part you like the most. Connect with me on Instagram, book a call down below. I'm looking forward to talking to you soon and hearing about how it went.